Today I want to show you my favourite winter tactic. It's non-selective, so it catches everything that's in the lake. Roach, skimmers, F1s, carp, and more often than not it can be an absolute match winner. What you'll enjoy about this for open water lakes is it's super simple. 1 rig, 2 rigs maximum. We've only got 1 setup today. What's really important though is distance, and the colder it gets, the further out in the lake you want to be. So when it's mild, 13, 14.5 metres, but when it's absolutely freezing, getting that 16 metre section on will give you a massive advantage. How you feed your bait at the start is really, really important. So where I'm going to fish, I can fish on my bait and just past it. But to be able to catch a big weight of fish, you know, silvers and carp, you want to be fishing on an area. So what I do is roughly halfway down my section, I feed 3 pots in a line, roughly about 18 inches apart. And then at the end of my 14 metre section, I feed another 3 pots in a line. So I've got 6 pots over a nice big area, and that allows me to fish on my bait if there's carp in my peg. But what I found here, especially at Gold, when them big silvers are in your peg, you catch them just past. So by feeding my bait, I can always fish on my bait in my front rest and just past it in my front rest using my dolly bar. This is one thing that I could not fish without. It's got a bit of a bad reputation. Oh, you're lazy. Biggest thing is you cannot physically hold your pole any stiller. The big open water lakes today, it's lovely, it's quite calm. But when that wing gets up and when that toe gets up, you're fighting your pole. With this, it's important because it holds your rig still over your bait. A few little tips when it comes to using it is almost ignore your pole. You've plumbed up to a far bank marker, you've fed to a far bank marker. It's where your pole float is. So if it's towing that way, have your pole tip up toe. If it's towing the other way, again, have your pole up toe. One little thing about getting the height right, one thing that I find, you know, really, really important is having some back shot, probably 6 inch from my pole tip. So once I've set me, you know, my rest up, I don't want my pole tip under the water. Likewise, I don't want it a million mile above the water. But by setting it up, just so when I relax my pole, my back shot's sort of like 1 inch and a bit under the water. And that way, if I wiggle my tip like it would do when it's windy, it's not transferring onto my float. So my pole can be moving around as such in the wind, but my float is sat there so static. And the difference it makes is frightening, to be honest, especially when you're fishing longer lengths. So give it a go, you will not be disappointed. Bait for this technique really isn't complicated and it doesn't cost a lot. All you need is a couple of pints of maggots, a few expanders, a bit of ground bait and some micros, which is handy because that way when you get back home after a cold day, you can put the eating on. Loose feeding. Why loose feed and not just put some more ground bait if that's what we fed at the start? Well, after your initial ground bait that you fed, the fish are past your pole line. They're not actually on your pole. So they come in and settle on your bait or in and around your bait. The problem is with putting more ground bait in is it can do one or two things. It can either make your peg a lot better and the fish home in on the bait, or can have the opposite effect. It lands and the fish scatter. The nice thing about loose feeding is you're forever topping up your peg nice and gently, and it's also the attraction of your loose feed hitting the water, maggots or pellets. They hit the water, falls through, really, really attractive to the fish. What I quickly mentioned then is maggots or pellets. Why would you use each one? To be honest, my go-to is live maggots. Everything eats them, and especially them big carp, they absolutely love them. But what is also nice about maggots is the fact that they're wriggling. You can see now, you can imagine when they hit the bottom, they sort of go into all the like the nooks and crannies. So when the fish are looking, there's not a big stand out of bait. So if you feel like you might have fed a bit too much, 5–10 minutes down the line, there's less bait on the bottom. The only downside of maggots is sometimes it can attract the wrong fish. So when it's mild, a lot of these lakes, they've got a massive head of roach. Now, don't get me wrong, when the fishing's difficult, and this is the decision you can make during your session, if no one's catching anything, then fish for them. That's absolutely brilliant. But when it's fishing well and you want to try and avoid them little tinies, by loose feeding pellets, you can get through them, target them bigger skimmers, carp and F1s, and ultimately, they're the match-winning fish, and they're the ones that we want to be catching. Rig for today, starting off with the elastic, is white hydro. It's still quite mild, so white hydro is absolutely perfect. I'm still going to get plenty of elastic coming out, catching skimmers, F1s, but when I hook them proper fish, I need to be getting them out. Mainline choice never changes. 017 mainline. We're fishing in sort of 7-8 foot deep. So you start going lighter, you're just going to get tangles and you're just going to get broke. It doesn't make a difference. Will do if you start using 019, but stick to 017, you will not go wrong. Float choice, wire stem is essential. You're fishing between 6 and 8 foot, so you get a lot of drift, a lot of movement on these big lakes. So having a wire stem, that aids stability. You want a round body, again, that helps with tow, with the wind. Bristle choice, summer, hollow tips, absolutely fine. But as it gets colder, you want a fiberglass bristle because it shows up all of them little tiny indications. You'd be amazed that some of the biggest fish, they give you the tiniest little dinks. And if your float's too buoyant, you won't be able to see them. Size-wise, 4x16 to a gram, that'll suit most of your open water fishing. Shotting pattern-wise, again, not complicated. A bulk of number 8s. The harder it is, drop your dropper sizes. So when it's good, you can fish number 9 droppers. If it's difficult and you feel like the fish are watching your bait, use 2 number 11s. Makes a big difference there. And then lastly, onto our hook length. I use a 5-inch hook length. Today, we're proper beefed up, 015 and a 16 Super LWG. But again, as it goes colder, dropping down to an F1 pellet hook, so 012 to a 16 F1 pellet hook, and then 010 to an 18 or a 20 F1 pellet hook. But what's really important is that you balance your hook length to your elastic. So Super LWG, white hydro, absolutely fine. But you don't want to be using white hydro with an F1 pellet hook, because when you hook them, you're just putting too much pressure on that hook. So my guide is when I'm starting to feel like the hook is making a difference and a lighter hook length, that's when I swap to yellow hydro, and that is the perfect elastic because you get plenty out when you're hooking your roach and your skimmers. But it's weird because when you hook them big carp, it's like they don't know they're hooked. And literally I can count on one hand the amount of times that I've been broken using that setup. So I've just hooked into a bigger fish, and I just want to give you a few tips when it comes to hooking big fish on your pole. So the one thing here is I've got a lot of open water and it's deep, and it's funny because you hook some and you think, yep, that's a bream, and they don't really fight, and then you hook others and they want to take you literally across the lake. So the biggest thing is when you're shipping back is don't be too keen to break down. And one thing that I like to do, once I know the fish is happy, it's not going to charge off, this one looks like it's behaving itself, I've got my pole on my leg and I've got my pole behind me on the roller, so the pole's safe, can't go anywhere. Now I can make the most of this time to loose feed. The maggots take a bit of time to sink. So whilst everything's, you know, the fish is sort of looking after itself, and it's at this point you need to be making your judgment call. So it's whether to break down or not. A lot of the time they come in and then they charge off. So it's just taking your time. So this one at the moment is being really, really behaved. But what'll happen is when you start, now it's woken up, now it can feel the pressure that I'm putting on it with my puller kit. Just take your time, they're such big fish. It's not a case of trying to net everything within 0.2 of a second. Take your time. And if I feel like you're you know, gonna go, then I just release the elastic slightly. See there? So as soon as I feel him go, I can drop the landing net down, release the elastic with my fingers. So by just clamping it with my fingers like so, that way, if I've got my landing net in my hand and it runs off like there, I can just let it out from my fingers. So again, just let it release. Just keep your elastic away from your box as well. Just make sure that it's not going to get tangled anywhere. So if he wants to run off, I can just let him. But it's about taking your time, you know. Don't rush them. They're big fish. You don't need lots of them. And there you see. I hope you've enjoyed this bite size, and if you'd like to see another bite size that I did at Woodlands Thirst all about silverfish fishing on a waggler, have a look here.